Hey folks, it's Ryan Honeyman here, partner and worker owner at Lyft Economy. And as some of you may know, B Lab just released yesterday some updates to the new standards, a new certification hub, and some other resources. And so I wanted to do this video to walk through what I'm seeing, at least at this early stage, and what might be useful for you and how to make sense and wade through some of these new changes. So, just caveat, I won't be going in depth on like all of the changes because there are some things that are pretty technical and might not apply to many of you. So if there's parts that you would like more clarity on, you can reach out to me directly, Ryan at lifteconomy.com, and happy to chat with folks and help them make sense of the new standards. So the first big change is this certification hub that B Lab launched. And I think it's a great idea. There's probably been too disparate of a way. The resources for the new standards have been a bit disparately dispersed. And this gives us a little bit more of a focused place to keep the new standards content. And so let me walk through some of the changes that were made, and they're listed in this certification hub. So first, there's a new naming convention, which at first didn't make sense to me, to be honest. I was like, huh. Um, so version 6, which is the old standards or the current standards that haven't quite gone away yet. We don't have a great name for it, but I like B Lab going with old standards. They're now calling it version 1.6. And so version 1 being this sort of standards that B Lab had iterated on since 2008 when the company was founded, the organization was founded, up to version 6. So the new standards they're calling version 2.0, and they do note that in some of the standards material they'd called it version 1.0, or the former version was referred to as version 1.0, etc. So I don't think you need to get too confused about it, but basically version 2.0 was released in April, and now there has been an update and iteration on those standards that they're calling version 2.1. So the reason it didn't make sense at first is because there's already been a version 2 of the standards many years ago. It was probably 2010 or something like that. But I understand what they're doing. They're saying that was version 1.6. So that would have been version 1.2 in 2010, and now they're going to version 2.1. So it's all a little bit more clear, and I don't have any problems with this once I understood where they were going. So some of the changes, there's been some updates since the April 2025 launch. They've updated some things. They've updated compliance criteria, etc. Some specifics to climate action as it relates to service with a minor footprint, which was an error. And they have a full change log if you really want to understand what was different. I think the bigger question, maybe surprise for some people, is just that the standards, there's been any changes to them at all since April. I think a lot of us, me included, didn't quite expect any changes to the standards to happen so soon. And these aren't like huge substantive changes across everything. It's just some tweaks. So it's understandable. And the amount of work that B Lab has done behind the scenes to get this thing launched in April, it's understandable that it wasn't sort of quote unquote perfect in April. So I understand it. I think the concern or question folks have is, what does this mean? Like, is there going to be, a bunch of updates, every few months now? And like, how does that change how we're thinking as companies? How do we really prepare for these things? But B Lab had said that they don't expect or anticipate any more changes in 2025. And it's hard to predict by 2026 what's going to happen because one of the things they're doing, which I think is good, I'm just going to skip ahead really quickly, is they're doing some pilot testing. So there is some pilot programs with a cohort of B Corps to test the new scoping and track rules, ensuring requirements are applied correctly, and folks can actually speak to their regional representatives if your company would like to be included in upcoming pilots. So that could be interesting if you're just really wanting to get a sense of like what's happening and getting your head around things. You could potentially reach out to your global partner. I think that's what they mean by regional representative. So whether it's BLab US Canada, UK, Europe, System Bay, and also in Asia and Australia and New Zealand. So basically, you just have to reach out to your global partner. And I think it's important to just baseline note that BLab has always claimed we are called a lab because we don't know the answers. We're trying things and seeing what sticks and iterating. And so I know it's difficult and hard for folks when there's iterations and changes. And it's always been part of BLab's ethos is to like, we need to constantly improve and make changes. And at the same time, I do think it's a recurring theme that a BLab is getting better at, but could still even be even better is sort of communicating that certain things are possibly going to happen. Like I don't think many. I mean, I follow this every day, every week, and I didn't know there was going to be these changes coming. So that could be a thing to improve for BLab. But at the same time, in this certification hub, they're actually giving us a little bit more of the roadmap. So appreciate what they're trying to do here. And it's hurting a lot of cats and juggling a lot of balls. So the second big thing that folks should be aware of is this risk tool questionnaire was published. So if you remember, in some of the earlier conversations, if you've been to any of the impact collabs or webinars that BLab has hosted, there's this, they often reference this risk tool that was going to be coming, but hadn't been here yet. And so we've got some examples of this happening. And so, one way that I'll do this is I'm actually going to show you how it shows up. So it's in the foundation requirements. So if you go to your sort of online platform and you go to the home page, this is called B Impact. Remember, it's a little different than the B Impact assessment. Basically the same thing. Emmy and I joked it was called the BEEP, the B Impact platform. So you go to B Impact, you go to self-assessment, and depending on the size of your company, et cetera, the different requirements will show up. And so the risk tool is under the foundation requirements, and it's under foundation requirement 3. So the reason that this is a bigger development is that you have to create a risk profile to meet certain requirements. So for example, it's almost like the old school disclosure questionnaire, if folks referencing version 6 of the assessment. But for example, did the company contract with more independent contractors than it had employees? So there's 14 questions, and you basically have to go through, if this shows up, and answer sort of like, yes or no. Actually, I don't, it's one of the things that's coming is like how you answer yes or no, and it'll be more formally integrated into the B Impact platform. But for now, you can just get a preview of what these questions are if you're interested. So let's say, for example, if you're a small company that employs, you have more independent contractors than you have employees. So this would be like the DoorDash or Uber, model where you've got 10,000 contractors and like 1,000 employees, which I think BLab rightly has some suspicions about. what you would do is to say, if you're a small company that has this, you, in addition to the sub requirements that already apply on your assessment, so that's the amount that shows up when you log in, your company also has to meet these additional questions. So HR 2.1, 2.3, and 2.4. And the company considers the potential impact in the human rights saliency assessment 2.1. So basically, the gist is if you meet any of these sub requirements, or if you have any of these risk factors, then you have to meet additional requirements for certification. Similarly, if you're a large company or uh, if you're in manufacturing, agriculture, wholesale, retail, service, etc., you have to, meet HR 2.5. So basically, it just means you have to meet additional requirements. And what I don't actually think is built in yet, however, is like, say you are a small company and it says you should meet these, but I'll bet that if you actually go in to the requirements or dashboard, let's see, HR 2.1. Okay, it is built in here. But this isn't for a small company. This is a medium company. And so um, let's see, meets HR 2.5 for medium companies. Let's see if that's in here. So that's not in here. So let's say you see something in there that you are required to meet, for example, this medium requirement, and it says you should do this, but then you go to your dashboard and you're like, try to go find it and it's not in here. And you're like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. What you would have to do is go into the uh, version, the PDF version of the assessment, which I'm going to show you just because it's good to know. And I'm just going to scroll down here because there is a link. It says you can download the complete requirements years 0, 3, and 5 as they apply to all companies here. So you could go there, you could you could download the human rights requirements, and then you could see, hey, I'm responsible for 2.5 now. Let's put that on our roadmap. And what B-Lab has said, which I'll go back to in a second, is that this will be integrated into the B-Impact experience. It's just right now it's not. So you kind of have to do it manually. This is also a helpful um, thing here is to see which date the standards were updated. They've updated these a couple times, just the PDFs. So for example, when it was first published on like April 8th, there were some formatting issues with some of the PDFs. So by April, 12th or like 15th, so like 7 days later, they had already done a new update to fix those formatting issues. They didn't change any substantive things. And then that, I believe, was the latest version until this version today. So there's a little bit of, tweaking and changing, and this can give you a sense of what's the most recent. But let's go back to the certification hub to not get too overwhelmed. So the next thing I'll talk about is new scoping rules. I'm actually not going to go super in deep on this because it's only for companies that have like entities, like related entities. For example, if you're a business that owns 3 other businesses, or if you're a multinational that has subsidiaries, there are a lot of B Corps. I think the vast majority of B Corps do not have complex structures. That's just one company, with employees, and so it's straightforward. If you really want to get into the details, I'll just a few things I'll mention just to give you a heads up. And again, this only applies to if your company actually has related entities or a complex scoping setup. So a few of the changes that have been made are I'll just name three. How about that? So for example, if you are um, if you're a large, let's give examples because I think this is a better idea. So uh, basically, if you have two different companies, but one management um, sort of layer. So for example, there's like two companies, but there's one CEO, one HR department, one um, CFO, one set of like VPs, but controls both companies. In the past, it was a little unclear as to like, well, they're two distinct legal entities, but what B Lab is very clear about in this version is you have to have separate management. There can't be one manager sort of uh, for related entities. So that's one of the three examples I'll give you. The second is operating under a unified single sustainability management system. So what that means is an example might be, the basically an example might be if you're a company with two different facilities and one facility is a little bit more sustainable. It sort of has it tracks carbon footprint. It has maybe some sustainability elements. And then there's another facility that doesn't. Um, in the past, B Lab has allowed companies to be in scope where you didn't necessarily have to have a one sustainability management system that applied uniformly across both locations or entities. But what they're doing now is you have to have like the same policies, the same goals, the same tracking, the same reporting. Um, and if you can't meet that, I believe you can apply um, under separate certifications. So it's not like you cannot be certified. It's just you can't sort of roll everything up into one certification. Uh, you have to do separate certifications for the two entities. So that's another change. And then maybe the last one is the the sort of the corporate. Um, so the well, there's always been the separate legal requirements, but I think the one that I wanted to point to was sorry, I was just like I've been reading through these things. Um, basically, you have to be able to have a let's say there's an ownership, you own another company. The subsidiary company has to be able to make its own sustainability or like legal decisions around things. So, for example, let's say um, you're a company that's owned by a multinational, but in the past you haven't been able to sort of create and enforce your own sustainability policies. You're just sort of adopting the parent company's policies. Like, say it's a large company, you have to adopt their policies. What they're trying to do now, what B Lab is now saying, you have to be able to, as that entity, to and be able to enforce your own sustainability policies without being blocked by the parent company. And if not, B Lab has to require a commitment letter from the parent company giving that authority, or there needs to be a different scope. So that's just to give you a little bit of taste to add to your, I don't want to say chaos because it's all just new. And so it's just a lot to digest. And so that's why I'm doing this video, is to help calm nerves, be the rudder in the ship, moving on through moving on through the progress. But it's I guess I would say if you feel confused, I literally wrote a book on B Corps and live and breathe this stuff, and it's still confusing for me. So just I want to give everyone on here a little bit of grace to say it's just hard. This is a lot to go through. And I would understand if folks feel crunched or a little frustrated or a little scared. It's normal. Um, and then, let's allow ourselves to feel those things, and then we can, continue to move forward, because I think this movement is still really powerful and can do a lot of great things. There's over 10,000 of us in the world. Now let's talk about the end of 2025, what we can expect. So a full setup, assessment setup launch, so that sort of integrates the scoping rules that I just mentioned, and basically any unanswered questions that are newly applied can be answered. The risk tool that I mentioned earlier will be integrated into the self-assessment. Um, the certification requirements for B Corps um, will come, and it includes like the process steps, the scoping, the self-assessment, what the certification cycle will look like, frequency of auditing, um, and then requirements for maintaining the certification over the certification cycle and recertification. So as you all know, B-Lab, a lot of these requirements are going to be, the current slash old version of the assessment, 1.6, using B-Lab's new terminology. It was a lot of, you do these things and you just need to have them in place. Honestly, you have to have them in place for the time you certify, and then show that you've done some things where they're still in place by the time you recertify. So that could be a 3-year gap between checking to see if you're actually doing some of the things that are part of that initial certification. And what B-Lab is now going to be doing, these new standards, is you have to show progress on these things every year. It's not going to be nearly as burdensome as like the certification that will be every 3 years, but there will be a sort of, you have to show continual improvement or continual maintenance of these uh, sort of social and environmental impact things that have been implemented. And I think that's one of the nice things about this new standard, and I think that gives this new standard credibility. So it is a headache. No one wants to do busy work and annoying things. And at the same time, part of the credibility of the movement is that we have to be able to show that we're not doing these things to check the box, but it's authentically embodied in like who we are as businesses. Um, So the last couple things here, further information on pricing, that will guard, so pricing and fee structure from the new B-Lab standards. I actually have no idea what that means. I don't think it's going to decrease. It can stay the same. It could increase, but I know that B-Lab is really trying to not have a shock and awe situation of a bunch of fee increases in addition to additional requirements. So in early 26, you can look forward to a new brand book. That'll be cool. Be nice to have some new B Corp logo, intellectual property and taglines, and then performance requirements certification guidance. Further information on what evidence is needed to meet the foundation and impact topic requirements will be shared. So one thing that's not mentioned here is anything on the assurance model. So if you've been following the changes for the new standards, B-Lab can no longer, due to European regulations, do the certification for companies, because the EU views that as, I don't know if self-dealing is the right word, but it's sort of like, we make up the standards and we certify the companies. The European Union is saying like, you can't do that anymore. It's not best practice. So B-Lab is going to be basically hiring a third-party company to do assurance, which means it won't be B-Lab anymore during the reviews. But I don't see anything in here on that. Maybe maybe this is sort of hinting at it. The performance requirement certification guidance. Um, well, actually, maybe I misspoke. It may be that this is covering that. Um, So it looks like this may be, it's just not called the assurance model. So it's a little unclear, but this may be what I was just referencing. And just as a note, that will be refined with these ongoing pilot tests, which is a good idea. There's probably companies who are being put through that assurance model to test it. And it looks like further information will be provided in January 2026. So these are just a couple things. I haven't not watched this video. I'm not sure if it's new, but check it out. Could be a new video, maybe something to share on social or other things about the new standards. And they're talking about some progress tracking and like a new homepage for B Corps on the B Impact platform. You can review the requirements, begin your self-assessment, and stay informed. I definitely recommend, if you have not, to sign up. Well, this is for impact business models. So if you're interested in helping develop impact business models, you could sign up there. And helpfully, on this certification hub, there are some FAQs, what's changed, managing negative impacts, your FR 3.1. FR 3.1 is the risk tool that I showed you all, the new scoping rules, document, and scope and standards transition guide for complex companies. So I would say B Lab is doing a good job trying to like consolidate everything into one place. They're getting their ducks in a row. And yeah, appreciate you all. This wasn't as deep of a dive as I could have done on these new releases, but hopefully this is useful. And feel free to reach out to us, lifteconomy.com, and my email is ryan@lifteconomy.com. If you don't already, check out the Beyond the Bee podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, because Emmy Allison from my team, and I discuss the new B Corp standards in detail with the people who wrote the standards, including Bernard Gao and Brigitte Niemes. And yeah, thanks all for watching, and hope to hear from y'all soon.